Presentation. How's everybody doing out there? Okay. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us. So we're going to transition now. We've completed our science presentations. Thank you, Ryan and Flint, for updating us on all the awesome work that you guys do. It's super informative and really awesome information to have in our tool belts as outreach educators. So I'd like to transition into the second half of our workshop, which is going to highlight different outreach education tools and approaches that people have been using within our field that help perpetuate and share our messages. So today we're going to have Franny Brewer from the Big Island Invasive Species Committee. She's going to share her work. So a short introduction about Franny. Franny Kinslow Brewer is the Communication Director of the Big Island Invasive Species Committee, BISC. She is a graduate of the biology program at the University of Hawaii at Hilo and an alumni of the PIPES internship program, where she began her career working for the USFS Institute of Pacific Islands Forestry. Her interest in communication and education led her to earn her master's degree in teaching at Chaminade University, and she worked for several years as a teacher in public and charter schools on the Big Island. Mahalo nui, Franny. Currently, Franny's work at BISC focuses on working with communities to develop collaborative solutions and support programs to invasive species problems facing residents. She has a certificate in sustainability and behavior change from UCSD and has worked to develop social marketing strategies to encourage residents to take action on invasives like little fire ants. So from here, I'm going to let Annie take it away. Thank you, Annie, for joining us. And mahalo. Stage is yours.
Hi, guys. Good morning. Thanks for having me. Thanks, Hoku. Yeah, I'm going to try sharing my screen right now. All right. Are you guys seeing the full screen?
Yep, looks good.
All right, great, thanks. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit about behavior change and just social psychology. So switching gears from Flint's talk quite a bit. We're not gonna discuss soil substrates in this one. But it really is a critical piece of what we do in science, thinking about that human aspect. This is a great quote about how conservation problems are really social and economic problems, and I think we can all agree with that. And yet, here's everybody with a biology degree trying to solve social and economic issues. So we have to think about that larger picture when we're expecting folks out in the public to advocate or change their behavior or do certain things. And the way that a lot of times we think to do that is to really inform people. If we get enough information out there into the public and we get enough knowledge and awareness, that just people understanding what the issue is will lead to folks saying, oh, wow, okay, now I'm going to do the right thing, right? So I have a question for all of you guys out there this morning. See how honest you're going to be. This is actually not a trick question. Do you know the basics of how to live a healthy life? Like what you should do generally to be healthy, keep your body healthy. So you can kind of, I can't see the chat because I'm presenting, but you can say yes or no. I like people to be honest, but I think, again, nothing special. What are the basics, right? Everybody feel like they know the basics? Okay. So here's the next question. Did you eat your 10 fruits and vegetables yesterday? Right? Recommended five servings of fruit, 5 servings of vegetables. Did you get all of them in yesterday? How about those 2 liters of water? Did you drink all the water you're supposed to drink yesterday? And if it's mixed with hops, that doesn't count. Did you get your 30 minutes of exercise? Right? You need that nice cardiovascular, some strength training. And the big one that's always a problem for everybody, 8 hours of sleep. So how many of us knew these were things that we were supposed to do? And then how many of us actually did them, right? So it's not really about anybody telling us we should be doing those things. It's really what takes you from knowledge and awareness to action. And a lot of times we default to the knowledge deficit model when we're sort of thinking outside of our own behavior, that if we just inform people enough that they're going to come to the actions that we need them to come to. And it's a lot harder than just, oh, I just fill this gap with knowledge and then boom, I'll get the action. And in social psychology and social theories, social behavioral theory, there's a lot of work that's been done. So when you think about behavior and what makes somebody behave in a certain way, the sort of the goal of this is not really for you to look at every single piece that's in this graphic, but just even one of the earliest theories about behavior, the theory of planned behavior, that there's so many pieces that scientists are looking at and saying like, well, this goes into behavior, this goes into behavior. Before somebody behaves, these are the things, right? And since there's been so much work over this over the decades, there's some major theories in social science. And one of them, you may have been familiar with, diffusion of innovation. And that's used a lot, when you think about tech, people who are in line to get the latest iPhone versus those that sort of like wait until a lot of people have it. And then maybe when it goes on sale, and there's this diffusion of innovation. And that's with a lot of different behaviors that there's the early adopters, there's the people who want to be on the edge. And then it sort of takes a while for things to go through through society and become a new behavior. There's social cognitive theory, which is this idea of all the different influences that come together in order to produce behaviors. Stages of change, which shows that we are in this dynamic kind of movement all of the time, where they're iterations of how we incorporate behaviors into our life. And then there's social norms theory, which, if you know about social norms, that alone is really complex. These are all major theories, and there's lots of moving parts to them. So the idea is that social science is this very, very big field with a lot of information that we can draw upon to improve the work that we're doing as outreach specialists, and just in general in science when we think about how we're going to communicate our work in the public. So JB specifically asked me to talk about our fire ant program today. For those of you who aren't familiar with the ISKs, we really have to work on invasive species problems that often cross boundaries. And certainly on the Big Island, a lot of our major invasive species issues like Albizia they're community problems. They're not just forest problems. They're not just watershed problems. They're across the landscape. So we have a lot of work to do with getting people to participate with us in controlling invasive species. And in the case of little fire ants, which if you're on the Big Island, you know just how nasty these guys are. I'm not going to talk a little bit about that because if you're working in conservation in Hawaii, you should know about fire ants, but they're a pretty bad guy, listed as one of the top threats before rapidopia death became known. It was the top threat to invasive species threat to Hawaii. These ants reach incredibly high densities, up to 20,000 ants per square meter, and are predicted to cause lots of damage. They're already causing lots of misery and damage for our farmers and residents on the Big Island. So what we did was looking at this. They're miserable enough that they're their own advertisement for knowledge and awareness. But we really wanted to get people involved in the behavior of controlling fire ants. So we took a specific model called community-based social marketing, and that's been used a lot in health. It's used a lot in sustainability of water, sustainable actions regarding energy, and it's only recently in the last few years started to be applied towards invasive species. So we didn't have a lot to go on specifically with invasive species, but we wanted to use this model and apply it towards behavior with control of fire ants. And again, this kind of incorporates a lot of those theories that I talked about. This kind of incorporates pieces from all of these and puts it together into sort of a step-by-step work plan that you can use to figure out what behaviors you're going to focus on to reach the larger goal that you're trying to reach. And for us, identifying those behaviors, we wanted people to survey, we wanted people to quarantine, but most especially, we wanted people to control, to actually get together with their neighbors and control fire ants, which is not a one and done. It's something that has to take place over 12 to 18 months. So it's pretty time intensive. The treatments have to happen on a very specific time basis. And these were all barriers to people actually getting fire ant treatment done. So there was a piece of this that was knowledge and education. And if you look at sort of this breakdown of social marketing, one of the things that you do when you're planning a social marketing campaign is you identify the benefits to the behavior and you identify the barriers to the behavior. And your job is going to be to try and reduce those barriers and highlight or increase the benefits. And you can see that one of the things that is in this toolkit is education. So that is a key piece. So it's not that knowledge and awareness isn't important. Sometimes it's really critical because you can't get to the next step without it. It's sort of that that's one piece. And then it's like, what are the other pieces that we're going to build in? So for us, for this program, we decided to build in some work on social norms. Obviously, education was foundational, prompts and commitments. And again, there's a lot of information on this and you can dig into this stuff for days. So, which I have, it's really fun if you're at all a psychology geek. But we worked with a scientist from Stanford. She is now at Colorado State University, but she came out here and worked with us for 2 summers. And what we did was we actually separated our communities. We pair match communities based on demographics, incomes, all kinds of things, all throughout Pune, Hilo, and Kona. And we separated them into 2 groups. We did 5 what we call traditional knowledge transfer, which was me going out there, giving like the best educational presentation that I could do, you know, using all of my tricks and tools and enthusiasm and all of, you know, fun stuff, but then taking that exact same presentation and adding certain social science pieces to it. So same information presented with the same presenter in the same way, but then with some tweaks, right? No tweaks to the science, no tweaks to the information, just tweaks to how we were interacting with the community. And we were really flexible with this program. We met people in all kinds of places. It was really coming to the community and meeting them where they were at when they could. And so that was a really big piece of it. And one of the things is that as we went through the behaviors that we wanted them, the education we wanted them to have, the behaviors we wanted them to adopt, we also offered them, and this went across the board, all communities were offered this little free bonus program. And I won't go into all the pieces of it, but it was like lots of good stuff and you get it for free. If you can organize a group in your neighborhood to come together and treat, we will basically hold your hand through this whole thing. So that's what we wanted to come out of this meeting, is that we wanted to present that to these communities and then have folks at that meeting say, I'm going to go home and organize my neighbors. So in order to sort of try and get that level of work, these are the social science pieces we put. So we did the education, but we also included interaction, asking people to talk to each other about the challenges they were facing or the challenges they thought that their community might face in trying to get together and treat fire ants on a larger scale. We also asked people to make a public commitment. So during the meeting, I would list the behaviors that I wanted them to take, and then I would ask them to raise their hands if they would agree to do those behaviors. And after each one, I'd pause and I'd say, look around, look how many of your neighbors are willing to do this. So it was this very public statement. We also had them at the end of the meeting sign a big poster that said, I am committed, I'm pledging to fight fire ants in my community. And we had these little commitment cards. So we had lots of ways that people were sharing with others that they were making a public commitment to treating fire ants. And then to kind of establish norms, but also create visibility and give people prompts right at the meeting before anyone had done any behavior. We gave them a yard sign that said, little fire ants, LFA is being controlled here, so that they could take that home and put that in their yard. And I was really surprised at how much people loved these signs. And they just like flew out the door. But it was something where they had committed to treating, but they hadn't treated yet. We still gave them the sign so that they could go home. And there was this connection of like, right, I'm supposed to do that. And at the time we had enough money to even send mailers out to other people in the community, telling them your community has committed to treating fire ants. So we were again raising visibility. So we did some surveys before the meeting. We did 2-month surveys. We did 7-month surveys, follow-up post-meeting. And what we found was specifically looking at collective action, whether people worked together. You know, there's a difference, although not necessarily significant. But where we saw significant difference was between people. Part of the questionnaire that we did in this survey was about values, beliefs, attitudes, like what motivates you? What kinds of things are important to you? Things like, you know, taking care of the earth, things like being looked up to in your neighborhood. Like, do you want to be respected in your community? You know, it's important to me to have my family and friends think that, you know, I'm doing ethical things, like different kinds of questions. And what we found that was really interesting is that if you showed that you had high biospheric and altruistic value orientation, which means that you really responded to, I want to take care of the earth, I want to do the right thing for the environment, you know, I want to take care of the people around me, then there really wasn't any difference in whether you were at the traditional knowledge transfer meeting or whether you were at the social science enhanced meeting, because you were going to treat for fire ants either way. You just, when I told you fire ants was a problem, you were like, I'm going to take care of this problem. And that was what we saw. But for those for whom those were not huge values, people who were kind of like, yeah, I mean, the earth, yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess environment, maybe I recycle. For people who sort of went more in the direction of, it's really important how people perceive me. It's really important that my neighbors and my friends and my family think I'm doing the right thing. What we saw with that kind of high desire for being respected is what we called it. Those people were a lot more pushed to taking collective action, more so than if they were in the social science enhanced meeting, more so than if they were in the meeting where we just did traditional knowledge transfer. And again, with the goal for BISC, right, because there was different goals, because we had the social science researcher was really looking a lot more at that motivation part. But I wanted to see the hard numbers for me were how many people were going to come out of that group, that community meeting, and organize their neighbors. That was the thing that we really wanted. So we wanted to see folks bring their neighbors together and do the buckets and the peanut butter and the oil and all that kind of stuff. And what was really exciting for us is that we had 5 traditional knowledge transfer meetings, and we had 7 of the social science enhanced, just because we had done 2 pilots. And so, you know, for what we ended up doing, we counted those because we did actually, out of the pilots, we did get neighborhoods signed up. And what you saw was in the traditional knowledge transfer, we only got 2 neighborhoods that organized. One of those was actually Joel Brunger, who you guys might remember. He worked at BISC. Joel was always going to organize it as soon as he heard that we were offering the free program. So he didn't really count. We did that for his neighborhood. No one else from Joel's community organized, but Joel did it. But it's kind of hard to count him because he was already going to do it. But on the other side, when we did the intervention communities where we had people talking to each other and making commitments and doing all this kind of stuff, we actually saw 13 neighborhoods get organized, which was huge out of 7 meetings. So from those meetings, multiple people decided to go home and organize their own little neighborhood group. So that was like a big deal for us. And what we also saw was that when we interviewed people months later about who had gone through the program, and we said, you know, what was the benefit of this program for you? In a half-hour interview, a lot of times they spent 5 minutes on the ants and the issue of solving their fire ant problem. What we really heard was 25 minutes of how this brought them closer to their neighbors, and stories of people saying, you know, I saw that person, you know, this would happen to us when we would come out to do the training. People would be walking up the driveway, kind of waving tentatively at each other. And that's all they'd ever done for 3 or 4 or 5 years was wave at each other. They'd never spoken. They didn't know each other's names until someone knocked on their door and said, hey, do you want to come to my little fire ant workshop? So we saw this connection, and that was what people talked about in their interviews. They talked about how they had formed connections, and it wasn't so conscious that they were talking about it. It's just sort of as they're talking to, we had, you know, these grad student interns, and as they're talking to the interns, they just went on, and that's what came up for them was, you know, when I had a baby, my neighbors rallied around me to help me with the fire ant thing, or somebody got sick. We had one woman who said she lost her husband, and having this monthly get together with her neighbors helped her get through like this year of grief. Like, it was just really interesting that so much of what came up was about this experience of being human and had really nothing to do with the impacts of fire ants environmentally or agriculturally or anything like that. And I think that's something that we have to think about, how important that connection with other humans is for folks, and how much of a motivator that is. And I put this picture specifically because these folks were displaced during the eruption that we had in 2018, and they could not be at their homes down in Lower Puna because of the VOG was so bad, and there was ashfall and all kinds of stuff, and potentially they were about to get cut off. But they would still come back to their neighborhood once a month to meet, to apply the fire ant treatment. So it was the thing that kept them going during the time when they had all scattered during the eruption. They used this as a way to maintain their neighborhood connection. So key takeaway, social science, how can it help you? One, we have a small group that we're trying to build on Facebook called Social Marketing Practitioners and Partners, and that's really Hawaii based. So we put in there things like, hey, there's going to be a workshop or a webinar, or there's some books available or talk. So if you're interested in this and you want to know what opportunities are available, find Social Marketing Practitioners and Partners on Facebook, and we will accept you to the group easy. The godfather of community-based social marketing, Doug Mackenzie Moore, cbsm.org. It's worth going on that site, looking up a little bit more about CBSM and how it came about. There's a great book on this called Fostering Sustainable Behavior, written by Doug Mackenzie Moore, some other partners. Robert Cialdini has written the book Influence. Highly recommend this book. It is absolutely incredible, talking about different aspects of social science, and he's got many papers that are specific to action in conservation, and that includes, the work that we did. For those of you who are familiar with the work we did on rapid ohia death boot brush signs, a lot of that came out of work that Robert Cialdini did, a lot of what we applied to that study. So highly recommend, looking up your Cialdini papers. Wes Schultz, another amazing practitioner, another name to put in the search box when you're looking up papers. A couple different websites, CBSM and then beyondattitude.com. That's run by a guy named Ken Donnelly, who is an advisor for a lot of different social science, and he's one of the first major practitioners to be working in the field of invasive species. So he's got some great stuff. The Social Marketing Association of North America, because there's amazing science that's been done on social marketing in the last year because of COVID. So a lot of this is being applied towards behavioral attitude stuff with COVID. Antioch University has some great stuff. But anyway, there's a lot of information out there. And I had a short period of time to kind of tease you or tempt you with this today. And so what I'd really like to do is encourage you to go out there and get more information. And you can also reach out to me at any time. That is my email. And I'm at BISC. And that's it. And now I can take questions. Did I take that down too fast? Sorry.
I have a question, Fanny.
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That wasn't my question, but how do you see, and I don't know if you've thought about this, how do you see trying to apply these ideas to rapid ohia death? I mean, is it more of a general overlay, or are there some specific things about ROD that you've thought about that, hey, this kind of stuff would really be helpful, and here's how to apply it?
Corey and I talked about this a lot, and it really comes down to behavior. So for instance, we did a lot of stuff with the boot brush signs, right? Because it connects to a behavior. And so when you want to do specifically community-based social marketing, when that's what you're wanting to use, you don't want to use that tool just like, oh, I want to use the tool and I'm going to find something to fit it in. Right. It really is when you're like, gosh, I really want people to engage in X behavior. How do I get them to do that, right? And it's a behavior that, you're going to get bang for your buck. I mean, one of the things we talked about was getting folks to, when they're having moving companies or utility companies or something like that coming into their neighborhood, having communities get together to talk about how they would consistently say, you need to clean your equipment, or this is how we want this done, and that they would do this as a community front, that it becomes a norm. And we were actually talking about maybe trying to do that with Hawaiian Acres just before COVID started, and we weren't able to get a meeting together because there was a whole issue with the utility company. So it's not exactly community-based social marketing in that case, because it's sort of applied more towards getting people to engage in just sort of that level of questioning.
How about,
but we were thinking about that.
How about the kind of that prickly issue about ungulate control and management?
I think with ungulate control management, like in general, it's not that's more of a support issue, right? So I think you have to, that's not really a behavioral issue. So it's not really something where you're going to apply this. There's other aspects of social science that can help with how do you build that. For instance, they do this a lot. If you look at like the Yale study on climate, right? Where you're looking at what the audience that you're trying to persuade, what values do they hold, and how do you tap into those values? Right. So if people hold a value of, I want to preserve the native forest, then you're like, here are all this is all the information about this. But if people are like, I want to preserve tradition, or what's important to me is my community, how do you frame what the message is that you are putting out there in a way that taps into that, right? Like, how do you tap into what things are important to them? Like, we need to maintain the forest for this tradition. Like, tradition is what's important to you. So it's about really identifying that. And the reason I brought up the Yale climate study is because it's called Six Americas, and they grouped folks into basically, and it's almost like a political continuum from, liberal to conservative. It's not quite exactly lined up that way, but when you read the description of each audience, you'll see that. And when they talk about climate change with that sort of right side of the continuum, they talk about the importance of protecting jobs. We need to do green jobs because it's about industry and it's about giving jobs to the young people. And they talk about the importance of, as Americans, we need to be leaders. We need to be first in green energy, and like using those kinds of messages, not let's save the polar bears, but what taps into what is important to those folks. So I think, you can use a lot of the same things that you use in CBSM, which are like surveys and small group focus groups and stuff, to look at the audience that you are trying to reach and find out what's important to them, and how is what the work that you're doing going to contribute to those values and help with what they care about. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think, like, thinking about what I know about the hunting community, there's a deep appreciation of native forests as well as an appreciation for hunting, and so those are both kind of commingled. So that makes a lot of sense. Franny, thank you so much for your talk. Appreciate it. Oh,
you're welcome. Thank you, Flint.
Nice, Franny. Thank you so much. Yeah, that was super informative. I'm going to go ahead and start the Mentimeter.